Përshëndetje të gjithëve. I nderuar kryetari i Akademisë Shkencave dhe Arteve të Kosovës, zotëri Mehmet Kraja, i nderuar nën kryetare zonja Justina Shiroka Pula, nderuar pjesëmarrës, kolegë, studiues dhe ndërmarrës. Është një nder i veçantë që në emër të Këshillit Organizativ të hap punimet e konferencës së parë ndërkombëtare për ndërmarrësi dhe menaxhment në Prishtinë, e organizuar nga Akademia e Shkencave dhe Arteve të Kosovës. Bota rreth nesh po ndryshon me shpejtësi, tregjet po evolojnë, teknologjitë po përparojnë dhe sfidat shoqërore po bëhen gjithnjë më komplekse. Përballë këtij ndryshimi, ndërmarrësia qëndron si një dritë e mundësive. Ajo nuk është thjesht një mjet për rritje ekonomike, është një mënyrë të menduarit, një forcë shtytëse që shndron sfidat në mundësi dhe idetë në zgjidhje transformuese për bizneset dhe shoqërinë. Në një botë dinamike dhe shpeshherë turbulente, e shoqëruar me luftra dhe kriza, qytetarët dhe konsumatorët shqetësohen për çmimet dhe cilësinë e produkteve. Punonësit për ndryshimet apo humbjen e vendit të punës. Ndërmarrësit ballafaqohen me pasigurinë lidhur me investimet, ndërsa politikbërësit lidhur me kursin e politikave publike që duhen ndjekur. Provat empirike të fundit tregojnë se pothuajse gjysma e punonjësve kanë frikë se do të humbasin vendet e tyre të punës për shkak të inteligjencës artificiale dhe ndryshimeve që po ndodhin. Po ashtu edhe ulëmtimet e tjera nga kompani të njohura konsulente si McKinsey Company tregojnë se automatizimi i mbështetur nga inteligjenca artificiale ka të ngjarë të luajë një rol gjithnjë më të madh me potencialin për automatizuar aktivitetet e punës njerëzore, që aktualisht zën deri në 70% të kohës së punonjësve. Kjo pashmangshëm shtron nevojën e reformimit edhe të sistemit të arsimit për të krijuar kuadro që kanë shkallësi kreative për të përshtatur rrethonave të reja të krijuara të tregut. Duke marrë parasysh këto sfida, sot jemi mbledhur këtu në Prishtinë për trajtuar tema të ndryshme të ndërmarrësisë dhe menaxhimit, ndërsa përballemi me ndryshimet e thella që po riformsojnë praktikat e biznesit dhe sfidojnë paradigmat ekzistuese në mbar botën, si në shkencë, ashtu edhe në praktikën menaxheriale. Në një epokë të përcaktuar nga avancimi i shpejtë teknologjik, ndryshimet klimatike dhe gjeopolitike, luftrat dhe sfidat globale të praprecedent, fushat e menaxhimit dhe ndërmarrësisë qëndrojnë në balë të transformimeve. Paradigmat tradicionale që dikur udhëheqnin këto disiplina po evolojnë me një ritëm të paparë, duke paraqitur si mundësi të pakrahasueshme, ashtu edhe sfida të mëdha si për individët edhe për organizatat dhe bizneset. Në këtë kontekst, tema e konferencës sonë, përballja me ndryshimet në një botë dinamike, shërben si një thirrje fuqishme për gjithë ata që janë të angazhuar në fushën e menaxhimit dhe ndërmarrësisë, qoftë si studiues, menaxher, ndërmarrës dhe politikbërës. Gjatë kësaj dite me aktivitete intensive, ne do të thellohemi në hollësitë e kësaj teme, duke eksploruar mënyrat se si ndryshimi manifestohet dhe si na frymëzon brenda sferave tona profesionale. Gjatë programit të konferencës sonë, ka falës të shquar nga gjithë Evropa, duke përfshirë Anglinë, Gjermaninë, Francën, Italinë dhe vendet e tjera të rajonit që të ndajnë njohuritë, përvojat dhe qasjet e tyre inovative për adresuar sfidat e ndryshimit të biznesit. Nga shfrytëzimi i teknologjive të reja deri te promovimi i zhvillimit të qëndrueshëm në kohë pasigurie, diskutimet tona janë po aq të ndryshme dhe dinamike sa edhe vetë sfidat me të cilat ballafaqohemi. Por përtej shkëmbimit të ideve dhe njohurive, kjo konferencë paraqet një mundësi unike për bashkëpunim dhe veprim kolektiv. Si studiues dhe praktikues të biznesit, ne jemi të lidhur së bashku nga një angazhim i përbashkët për nxitur ndryshime pozitive dhe inovacion. Përmes dialogut, bashkëpunimit dhe veprimit kolektiv, ne mund të krijojmë rrugë të reja në një botë e cila po ndryshon vazhdimisht. Sot jemi mbledhur jo vetëm si studiues, por edhe si agent të ndryshimeve në sensin shumë peterian të fjalës, për të eksploruar se ndërmarrësia mund të na ndihmojë të përmballemi me kompleksitetin e botës dinamike. Ndërmarrësit janë ata që sfidojnë status quo-n duke tejkaluar mënyrat konvencionale të menduarit, duke lancuar produkte, shërbime organizata dhe duke transformuar mënyrën e jetesës, përmirësojnë efikasitetin dhe krijojnë mundësi të reja pune. Diskutimet në këtë konferencë janë të organizuara në një sesion plenar dhe në disa sesione paralele me tema si inteligjenca artificiale, ndërmarrësia e gjelbër, qeverisja dhe shteti, konteksti i ndërmarrësisë, mundësuesit e zhvillimit të biznesit dhe praktikat menaxheriale. Do të prezantohen 34 punime shkencore dhe do të marrin pjesë mbi 100 pjesëmarrës. Prandaj le t'i qasim i çdo teme me një frymë kurioziteti dhe një dëshirë për një ndikim pozitiv në zhvillimin si të teorisë po ashtu edhe praktikës. Le të shërbejë kjo konferencë si një platformë prej ku ne mund të sfitojmë paradigmat ekzistuese, të vëmë në dyshim supozimet e modeleve aktuale dhe të shtyjmë kufejt e kërkimit shkencor në ndërmarrësi. Mos harrojmë se teoritë që zhvillojmë sot do të formsojnë praktikat e së nesërmes. Edhe një herë, mirë se vini në konferencën e parë shkencore ndërkombëtare në menaxhment dhe ndërmarrësi. Uroj që diskutimet tona të jenë të frytshme dhe kontributet e autorëve të rezonojnë përtej kufejve të kësaj konference, sepse dija është e vetmja gjë në botë që rritet duke ndarë me njëri tjetrin. Ju faleminderit dhe suksese.
Faleminderit, profesor Beshnik. Tani do të vazhdoj me folësit kryesor. Këtu kemi 3 folës kryesor që do të prezantojnë para jush në këtë pjesë plenare të konferencës. Është profesori Norbert Bach, është profesor i rregullt dhe drejtori i grupit kërkimor të menaxhimit dhe organizimit në Universitetin Teknik Ilmenau në prill të vitit 2008, që nga tetori vitit 2016, ai gjithashtu mban detyrën e drejtorit të Institutit të Administratës së Biznesit. Nga viti 2019 ka drejtuar Komitetin e Programeve të Studimeve të Inxhinierisë Industriale dhe Administrimit Biznesit me orientim teknik. Nga korriki vitit 2012 deri në dhjetor të vitit 2013, profesori Bach ishte dekan mësimdhënës dhe i mësimit në atë kohë Departamentit Biznesit dhe Ekonomisë. Nga viti 2008 deri në mbylljen e tij në fund të vitit 2017, profesori Bach ishte profesor i jashtëm në Shkollën e Studimeve Pasuniversitare të Biznesit në Universitetin Kurtin, Teknologjisë në Perth të Australisë Perëndimore, që nga viti 2018 ai ka bashkëpunuar me Shkollën e Biznesit dhe Drejtësisë në Universitetin Edith Cowan. Përveç punës së tij në Universitetin Teknik Ilmenau, profesor Bach është partner themelues dhe drejtor menaxhues i kompanisë konsulente për menaxhimin Excellence Change në Gießen dhe në Münster. Elos profesorin Bach të merr fjalën. Professor Bach, please.
Thank you very much.
Take the floor.
Okay, this seems to work. It's my great pleasure to be here and to be opening this conference with a keynote speech. My name is Norbert Bach, and I'm going to present work which is done together with my friend Peter Galvin from Edith Cowan University in Western Australia, and Ronald Hartz, who's a co-worker of mine at the Technical University of Ilmenau in Germany. And as you may see from the title, our work has something to do with change, and as the overall title of this conference is Navigating Through Change in Dynamic Times, what I would like to add and pay your attention to in this conference is a different perspective on change, and especially organizational change. Typically, when you hear something like navigating change, it means like you need to know where you are, and then you need a route which you can take in order to achieve your goal, your destination. You know your GPS device is in your car, and typically your car does exactly what you tell it to do. Unfortunately, that's not always the case in organizations. So if you treat organizations like a car that you can navigate with your GPS device and it reacts to your steering with the wheel, most likely you are not going to succeed. And what I would like to offer here is a different perspective, that what we look at is organizational routines and the dynamics inherent to organizational routines, which can be a trigger to organizational change, and depending on the individual actors and how they contribute to the performing of the routines, then enact changes. And as we all know from life, change takes time, and it always depends on who contributes and who is able and willing to change. And this is the study what we are doing here. We followed a small company, 180 employees in the eastern part of Germany, over a period of 3 years, going through a change in ownership from being a subsidiary of a Swiss corporation that wanted to restructure their portfolio, and then the managers that had been employed managers in the Swiss corporation putting in a bid as an MBO, so that after the sale, the previous subsidiary of an international corporation became an independent small and medium-sized enterprise locally based in Thuringia, East Germany. And of course, I think it's quite easy to imagine that this date of the sale, when the new legal entity was established, would make a difference to everybody in that company. Like, we have that history, some of them having worked in that company for more than 30, 40 years, being a state-owned company in the former GDR, then having seen changes in ownership a number of times after the reunification, and now being able to be free from any corset, to be independent as a small SME based in Thuringia. And as one of the employees said, the money now stays in Thuringia. And this is the story that I would like to tell. It's about navigating change. It's about achieving success in organizational change. And I'd like to take the perspective of, at 2 levels. Individual level, what do the individual employees think about it? What's their reflections? How do they contribute? And how does it merge in the routines where you have more than one actor contributing to the performance? And this is what we are going to see over the next, let's say, 25 minutes remaining. I'll introduce you to the world of organizational routines as repetitive, recognizable patterns of action. In my second part, I will outline the effect of time and temporality, and especially history, in the dynamics of routines. And then I will go through our study, explaining the data and methodology a little bit more, and present the findings and offer some ideas in the discussion. I have to say to the academic world here, this is still work in progress. It's not published yet. We presented this work at this year's IGOS conference in Italy, but there is no final manuscript yet. So it's work in progress. What are organizational routines? And before I switch to the next slide, what I would like you to do is rethink the word routine. I mentioned driving a car already, right? And probably most of you drive cars without thinking about it. So it's a routinized action, but you do it on your own. So some people say, especially in the organizational routines literature, individuals don't have routines. Individuals have habits and things they can do without thinking about it. But the unit of analysis we are talking about is organizational routines, and that refers to routines that involve more than one actor. And whatever you do in relation to what the others do and the timing of the actions of the others within the routine. And now let's have a look. I show you a picture of a routine that probably most of you have seen on television before. This is a corner kick in the Premier League in soccer. And while each and every of the players may have their preferred movements, and in order to score a goal, you need to interact. And depending on what the other defenders do or not, you have offside or not. But as the individual player, you can't do it just on your own. And this is what an organizational routine is about. It's a repetitive, recognizable pattern of action. So a soccer expert, if you listen to the commentary, they can tell you, even if you are not familiar with the sport, what's happening there. And what you see here, this is a screenshot from one of these analyses. They can highlight individual players. So this player is doing this, but he can't succeed because the other one hasn't done that. So this is an organizational routine, whereas if somebody kicks a penalty, it's an individual player who may have his preferred corner to kick the ball in. That's not an organizational routine. Now, this is sports. This is a different context. Why am I showing firefighters? I'm showing firefighters for two reasons. First of all, it highlights the dimension of time, and it highlights that an individual is unlikely to be able to extinguish the fire. In order to fight the fire, you need the whole team. And you need to know who is doing what. You need to be, you need to trust your comrades that they do the right thing, because otherwise your life might be in danger. What is the shared temporal orientation in a case like this? I'm not a firefighter myself, but from talking to people who are voluntary firefighters, the main goal is to extinguish the fire. They are not thinking about history or anything. It's about, there's a fire now, there may be some people in there that need to be rescued now, and we need to distinguish the fire. And from those recognizable patterns of actions that firefighters have been training, they know what to do in what order. And they know exactly, these guys here with the masks, they won't walk in until the guy who is shooting with the water gun says, now you're safe. They won't do it before they get the signal. So they react depending on what the others do. In organization studies, this is called an extreme context. And here comes the second reason why I'm showing this. The only empirical study that I know of, routine dynamics with a focus on temporality, is a study of firefighters fighting fires. So there is no empirical study yet that studies temporal orientation of individuals and temporal patterns of routines in a non-extreme context. Now let's have a third picture and think about a non-extreme context. And obviously, all of you may have moved house, moved apartment in your lives. It's nothing what you do on a daily basis, no. However, for a removal company, there are clearly recognizable patterns of action. For the truck to park there, you need to apply for permission 4 weeks prior to the date. In order to get this ladder there, you need to check out first, is there a balcony or not? You need to know what type of furniture needs to be transported. You need to know about the dates. What time does the landlord come in and ask for the key? What time and date shall we be at the destination? And depending on those time framings and temporal orientations, you may have to hurry up. You may have some time to go for a break and have a coffee. You may have to go faster on the motorway, or you can slow down. So your patterns of actions, the choice of patterns and the actual activities highly depend on the temporal orientation of those guys. Now, what is temporal orientation? And now I'd like you to think about differences in generations. Some of you may have children. Some of you may have parents that are still alive. And think of a family dinner. When do you need to have the meal on the table? That's different to the child compared to the parent, compared to different people at the table. But in the end, you need to make sure that the child is happy and that everybody can contribute and has a good time having that dinner. individuals have different temporal orientations, but the organizational routine is something they perform and enact together. So while the temporal orientation, feeling pressure, feeling hungry, or have to go to bed early, is an individual thing, the performing of the routine is something that is happening at the organizational or collective level. Now let's have a look at the literature. There's more or less 2 papers that are milestones in routine dynamics research. One of them is Pentland and Reuter in Administrative Science Quarterly 94, and I'm not reading it out, but it's while being enacted in a non-routine manner. This is the individual level. It's not like driving a car and not having to think about it. Routines reveal a set of functionally similar patterns and specific performances. Think about the free kick, think about a removal, a particular one, are enacted from a restricted but potentially large set of possibilities. And Pentland and Reuter have coined the term grammar of action. So there are grammars of action that you can choose from. So if you have a corner kick or a free kick in soccer, typically you have a set of possibilities to choose from. And organizations need those routines in order to organize expertise and exercise power. And for a long time, this unit of analysis, organizational routines, has purely been seen as something that, while it creates efficiency, is something that creates inertia as well. When we think about navigating change and routines as something that are unlikely to change in the old perspective. That changed with the paper that Martha Feldman and Brian Pentland published in 2001. They explained that routines, organizational routines, are a source of flexibility and change as well. So not only inertia, but a source of flexibility and change. How can that be? Now, I'll show you what the literature says in a few minutes, but think about it. There is a saying, you can't jump into the same river twice. There's different water in there. And think of the soccer team, think of the removal company. Each and every performance of a routine is different. Be it the equipment that wears out, be it that individual players have good and bad days, and still performances are enacted. You have to do the removal. You have to play the game today, even if it's a bad day. It even happens to the German national team or Bayern München that on some days, Harry Kane doesn't score. And so you have to react. You have to do something with it. Each and every performance is different. And this is the key now, you can learn from each and every change in the routine performance. While you hadn't thought about it, circumstances made it necessary to do it differently on the very day. And it turns out to be really good. So why not continue doing it the new way? Add a new potential possibility, a grammar to your repertoire. And this is why organizational routines are a source of flexibility and change as well. Organizational routines embody a duality. Some of you may know Anthony Giddens and his theory of structuration. So you always have action and structure as well, and action is always agency. You have actors with individual goals and individual interests. Now, structure describes the abstract idea of the routine, whereas agency describes the actual routine in actions by specific people, specific times, specific places. Harry Kane scored yesterday, but not today. No? Agency. It sometimes happens, it sometimes doesn't. And each routine enactment either strengthens, yeah, he scored again, so let's do it again. That's a good choice of a particular way of doing it. Or it didn't work out, and then it needs to be changed. We can't keep going as it has been successful for the past 20 years. Something needs to be done. And that paper in 2001 is more or less the founding stone of a whole research field, which is called routine dynamics. It's studying change from a totally different perspective and analyzing a different unit of analysis. And the key names in that area are probably Brian Pentland and Martha Feldman, and they edited a handbook of routine dynamics research, which was published in 2021. And in that handbook, there's chapters on most of the determinants in the framework as such. And one of the chapters is on time and temporality, and I picked this one because there is hardly any empirical research on the temporal dimension of routine dynamics yet. So Hannes framed it this way: actors move with the flow of time while making their own representations of time, of the present, past, and future. I think that's easy to understand, but hard to comprise in a framework. So Turner and Rindova, in that handbook chapter, they came up with this framework that we used as the guideline for our analysis. So on the left-hand side, you see temporal orientation, in brackets, subjective time. That's the individual level. So it's individuals. Think of the child versus the adult. Do we focus on the past, or what's happening right now, or on the future? And are we pressed for time, or is there enough time? Is time something like old people might say, I don't have much time left in my life? Whereas young people may say, well, the future is ahead of me, I have plenty of time. Or maybe I'm in a hurry because I want to achieve this and that in my life until. So this is the individual dimension. But on the right-hand side, we do have those temporal patterns, and there you can't act just on your own. You're depending on what the others do as well. And even if you want to hurry up, if your child doesn't, most likely you won't be on time. If your child doesn't want to hurry up, so you have to react to what's going on around you. And while there is something like a time-based patterning regarding, or clock-based timing according to a timeline or a clock, which is typical for an MBO as well. So there's a closing date and a starting date and so on. Well, these different patterns of how to perform the routine, and each and every individual has to react to it, and this is why we have those arrows in the middle. So that has been our scheme to analyze the case. What do we know? Temporal orientation and temporal patterning of routine performances must be studied as an interplay. You can't study just individuals, and if you forget about the individual goals and that people differ in their temporal perceptions, you won't succeed. So unfortunately, the only empirical work that we know of is the firefighters. So firefighters are aware of temporal boundaries. How long does it take to do what? And that there are trigger points. In the German Wirtschaftsinformatik, we know of ereignisgesteuerte Prozessketten. People who are familiar with that concept, it means event-triggered process chains. And this is what they refer to as trigger points in the routine dynamics literature. Something needs to happen in order to start the next activity. And firefighters, in their fight against the fire, they always try to generate something that Geiger et al. In their paper termed temporal autonomy. You try to get ahead of time, so if something unknown happens, you still have time to react. And if you're on the critical path, as network theorists would say, then you can't react anymore. There's no time to react, so you try to create a buffer. So in an extreme context, you may need those buffers. What about non-extreme context? What do we think? Like, our idea was firefighters fight for a shared goal. They want to extinguish the fire. But what about non-extreme context? Most likely in organizations, in normal life, non-extreme context, people will have different interests. Some of them would like to change the organization quite quickly. Some of them won't. What about the focus attending to time? In a fire, you focus the future. You'd like to extinguish that fire. And it doesn't really matter what happened there before the fire started. Not really. It's about extinguishing the fire and getting it over. In a non-extreme context, some people may value the past more than the future. Well, I have another 2 years until I retire. Why should I? So the attending to time and whether history matters or not is something at the individual level is most likely to differ from person to person. This is what we study. What are the research questions? It's explorative research. So more or less, we'd like to figure out, is a non-extreme context really different to an extreme context, what we know from the firefighter study? So how do people in an organization attend time? Do they focus more on the past, present, or future? Are there differences? How does it impact routine performances? Do they feel a sense of urgency, which is known from the change literature, to trigger organizational changes and to support, to overcome barriers to change? Do they have that or not? Do they think, well, there's plenty of time, so no need to hurry? What's the temporal patterns? So we have this clock time, the project plan, and we have our own feeling of time and our own chain of events. So do routine participants deviate or just follow the timeline? And how is the interplay? Explorative research, we need to keep that in mind. What's the research context? I already explained. It's a small company, 180 employees, east part of Germany. These are the two managers that decided to put in a bid. But what we need to keep in mind is that, I'll show you the data now, that when we did the first interview wave, which is 52 interviews in August through September 2019, employees already knew that the company was going to be sold. So the Swiss holding corporation wanted to restructure their portfolio, but they had a number of potential buyers, and the idea to have a management buyout to make it a locally owned company was only one out of many options. So some of the quotes in the interviews you'll see, you have to keep in mind at that time, they didn't really know whether that would be what's going to happen. And of course, it makes a difference whether you as an employee think this is something I would like to see happen, or whether you think, well, anything but that. I don't want to have private equity in here or something like that. So depending on who is going to win the bid, it really changes. Now, the closing happened in May 2020. So the second interview wave, we did the interviews more or less a couple of weeks after the new company was established. And in July, August, not that much happened. So we decided maybe we need more time, and we had another interview wave 1 year, more or less 1 year after the establishment of the new company. So all in all, it's 94 interviews. We also had access to a lot of other material that you can see here on the slide. And if you want to discuss, there's probably enough time during the day to go into more detail. I won't go into the details here regarding theory. The experts in qualitative research may realize the keywords, its grounded theory approach. Important to see here, since it's explorative research, we didn't have a preconception in mind. We started with open coding in order to identify categories. So what are the findings? Regarding the attention to time, the most important finding is that actors differ in their subjective times and how they interpret what's going on. It may not really be surprising, but the way let's say the amount to what it differs was quite surprising to us as well, and the way they actually explain it. And you may read the quotes, but some employees actually thought, we need change. Something needs to be done in order for this organization to survive. And unfortunately, some of our co-workers have been doing the same thing for 30, 40 years, and this is a burden. This is luggage we carry, and we'd like to get rid of that. And maybe the MBO is the once-in-a-lifetime chance to overcome all that load from the past. So some describe that, well, many of them in their routine can't get out of there. And others who have seen those changes in ownership over and over again, you have to keep in mind, this is after the wall came down, state-owned company. They, I think Conti bought them, then Phoenix, and then the Swiss company. And people say, I've been here since 1979. I've been through many changes, and it's always worked well so far. So this is why I think it'll work out again. People in this place know how to handle this. It's not as dramatic as it may sound. And if we're going to be small again, I worked in a small company before, and I much preferred it to being part of a large corporation. So we have this duality within the employees, valuing time. Do we have sense of urgency or not? And here we used temporal bracketing to figure out that before the MBO, people regarded time differently to after the MBO. Before the MBO, it kept everybody busy. It eats up everybody's time. You feel like you're in limbo. You don't really know whether it's going to work or not. So I'm doing my best, but it's a bit like being helpless. I just keep going, but I don't know how it all will end up. And after the MBO, hey, now we can decide ourselves. We have our own projects. Yeah, we can do it and we don't have to use corporate template XY. That's positive. But on the other hand, we have those people working at the shop floor, operating machines. We have a number of interviews where they more or less say, for me, when I'm standing at the machine, it doesn't really matter what name is at the door. Only the t-shirt changes. One person said, what has been Rider now is Twix. Research question 2, about the patterning. What we observed, and actually I discussed that with the owner afterwards, that people did that without letting management know. People said, well, our managers, they are busy trying to organize the financial side, establishing this, so we won't bother them with what is our responsibility. But each and every one of them had their own conception of, well, this is the closing date, and in my area of responsibility, what I try to prevent is that the routine performance goes across that date. So it should either be finished within the old legal entity. So some investments, for example, had been taken prior than originally planned so that the holding corporation would pay for it. And for example, in sales managers would talk to their customers without letting their managers know, actually, maybe you can order this lot next month. We can still deliver on time, but if you order it next month, you could do me a favor. So they decoupled things. So they prepared, they buffered, and they simultaneously enacted certain routines because they didn't really know in which way it was going to work out in the end. Important to realize, people had their individual subjective conceptions of the patterning as well, and changed or tried to change the patterns. And what we found out then, or what we see in the data, is that depending on the type of routine, sometimes it's the material embeddedness. You can't change that type of machine. One of the machines they have there is 50 years old, and it's the largest machine of that type in Europe and maybe even worldwide. And that machine runs 24/7. And this is the core asset. You're not going to change that. And other routines, especially financial routines, sales routines, if you're left free from the corporation, that makes a difference. So we see at the shop floor, I come to work, I do my job, after work I go home. This is it. Same machine as 40 years ago. And the financial routines, the strings that lead the puppet. You always had to meet policies made by headquarters. This is removed. This is great. This is us now. And now we have a bit of an interplay between temporal orientation and temporal patterning. I'll explain the last quote here. This is the guy from quality, and he needed an accreditation for safety. And the auditor had started prior to the closing date, and he couldn't really prevent this happening. But he didn't want to have the whole audition process starting again after the new company had been established. So he said, I actually called the auditor and I told him what I had hinted out to him before. Something may happen in the future. And if this now happened, and now please give credit to everything what you did in the past to the new legal entity. So within their own area of responsibility, they adjusted the patterning as well. Now, for reasons of time, I now jump a little bit more forward. There's, I think, interesting quotes that I like to talk about, but as academics, what we want to see is not only findings, but we want to see something that we refer to as a contribution. So what about the theory? And what we see here is there is the initial framework, but we added some variables to it. So we do have embeddedness, and depending on task specialization, people have a different temporal orientation and a different valuing of time. Those people working at the machine, doesn't really matter, same as ever. Those in sales or those in finance, they saw a difference. And depending on local norms, like we are an independent company, local company, entering here, the money stays here, we create jobs here, that's important. And what we are working on at the moment is the agency dimension or the agentic dimension. And I'll jump to this slide in order to highlight there is a paper which is fairly old, but which is more or less the cornerstone of how to describe agency of individuals within a corporation. So there is first an iterational element that actors selectively reactivate past patterns of thought and action. And then they have a projective element. What does that mean regarding the future? And then they more or less do a calculation. What's in it for me? What does it mean for me? And now I add what we see as the effect of temporality. History and hierarchy matter regarding the iterational element. And now the projective element, you can only project the future if you leave your individual perspective and include or complement with the patterning perspective of the routine. And here comes into play the material embeddedness. This machine, 40 years old, you can't change it. Your social embeddedness, your key customers. And then you do your evaluation. And here is what I would like to conclude with as the implications for navigating change in the turbulent world. Depending on self-interest and norms, you may form coalitions that help organizational change to happen, that may help societal change to happen or not. So what do we learn from the study? There is an interplay between individual level and organizational level, maybe even societal level. And if you try to navigate change as you drive a car, you're unlikely to succeed. And what our study adds is that even in non-extreme contexts, paying attention to and focusing the temporal orientation may help to find out about this forming of coalitions. And that, I hope, will give you some idea for discussions, and hopefully it relates to some of the additional talks that we are going to hear now. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Alba. Tani, fjallën të ta ketë profesor Andrea Caputo. Tema është anët e mira, terta dhe të qëndrueshme të ndërmarrësisë. Të them një 2-3 fjalë për profesor Andrea. Është profesor në strategji dhe ndërmarrësi në shkollën ndërkombëtare të biznesit në Universitetin e Lincolnit në Mbretërinë e Bashkuar. Më parë ka shërbyer si asistent profesor i administrimit biznesit në Universitetin Princes Sumaya për teknologjinë Jordani në vitin 2013 deri në vitin 2015. Dr. Caputo mori doktoratën e tij në menaxhim në vitin 2013 në Universitetin e Romës, Tor Vergata, Shkolla e Ekonomisë në Itali, dhe është alumni i programit të vlerësimit avancuar të INSET, Institutit Evropian për Administrimin e Biznesit. Ai ka qenë gjithashtu profesor vizitor në disa universitete në mbar botën, duke përfshirë Universitetin Queensland, pastaj George Washingtonin, Universitetin e Pisës, Universitetin Alicante dhe Universitetin e Saviljes. Ekspertiza kryesore kërkimeve Andreas lidhet me negocimin, vendimarrjen, ndërmarrësinë dhe menaxhimin strategjik, duke përfshirë temat të tilla si negociatat integruese, negociatat strategjike, dallimet kulturore, inteligjenca kulturore, gratë në ndërmarrësi në vendet në zhvillim dhe inovacioni. Ai ka autorizuar një numër publikimesh ndërkombëtare dhe puna e tij është prezantuar në konferenca ndërkombëtare si shoqata ndërkombëtare për menaxhimin e konflikteve, Akademia e Menaxhimit dhe Akademia Evropiane e Menaxhimit. Është gjithashtu konsultent aktiv i menaxhimit dhe negociator. Andrea është redaktor i serisë botimeve sjelljet ose sjellje ndërmarrëse, e publikuar nga Emerald, dhe është ndër koordinatorët e sesionit për vendimarrje dhe sjelljen e ndërmarrësisë në Akademinë Evropiane të Menaxhimit.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation to the Academy and Professor Krasnicki for having me here. It's really a pleasure to be for the first time in Kosovo, so which also I know that here you have two of my favorite colors are part of these regions, which are the red and the black. So I'm an AC Milan fan, so you can see in my presentation I try to bring it a bit here as well, since we had also some analogies from football. So today in this keynote I will try to reflect with you. So I'm not going to present a study, but probably to reflect a bit on the results of multiple studies, and I hope it will be a little bit of a journey throughout what I've done so far to investigate somehow the impacts or the sides of entrepreneurship. So I'm gonna deliver a speech trying to look at the good, the dark, and the sustainable sides, not necessarily in this order. I'm Italian, so I'm disorganized by nature. Hence, I mix them up in the presentation at least 10 times before coming here. Moving forward, I mean, I know you heard my bio, so these are just some of the journals where I'm involved in, and I know there are a lot of early career researchers here at the conference, and when you attend the conference, also an opportunity to get in touch with editors and with more experienced scholars. We have also some mid-editor sessions, so if you have any questions or interest of any of the outlets where I'm involved, please feel free to approach. We do need good papers. We are in the market for papers as well, so it's not only from the other side, the challenge to publication, but also from our side, the challenge to find a good author. So we are talking about sustainability. So I would like to set a bit the tone. What do I mean for sustainability in this talk? And I take a generic approach, quite a holistic approach. So you have some definitions here on my slides, but I think the one that to me it's dearest is somehow the common usage term that we have, which is basically able to be maintained. So I teach strategy mostly and negotiation, and funnily enough, sustainability comes a lot into the conversation on these two topics. Not much about the environment or climate change and the typical meaning that you can see, but actually for this able to be maintained. Because I think that, you know, a business to have a strategy that is sustainable, or a negotiated agreement to be sustainable over time, and I mean, we are in a region that suffered, I think, for well, hundreds of years of poor negotiated agreement at the end of some sort of conflict. So we can say that we have sustainability there. So if a strategy is not sustainable, it's not going to be profitable in the long term. It's not going to work. If an agreement doesn't pass the test of sustainability, so it's not sustainable for the stakeholder involved, it's not going to work. You're going to have problems for the future. So I like this able to be maintained. So you have something, we are good stewards, as we say in the UK, of the society, of the public goods, and as academics also of the knowledge. I was at the Academy of Management having an editorial meeting, and it's funnily enough that they labeled this network of editors as the guardians of science. I felt a bit like, you know, like the guardian of the galaxy or something like that, which probably is a bit exaggerated, but I think in our small part of the academic world, we do indeed have a duty of care for the society and the care. So to me, I think able to maintain it's quite important. And who are those people that, or those actors that should be maintaining the resources that we are given in a way that, you know, we will have them for the future generations, not only for the sake of, you know, a good art or whatever belief we have, but also for economic reasons, right? We want a society that is prosperous today and tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. So it makes, to me, it makes a lot of sense. However, as we know in the world, it doesn't, for many decisions that we make. So I started thinking at the impacts of entrepreneurship, mostly because in my career, I started my journey as a decision-making and negotiation scholar. So I'm interested to look at the dynamics of how we make certain decisions, and you start observing that there are a lot of decisions in the world that somehow are, well, the economists would call it suboptimals. I would say poor overall. So, and this decision, they will produce impacts. And especially when we talk about entrepreneurship, so in the creation of new venture or in the development of existing venture, well, for impact, what we mean is basically the long-term change produced by an activity. Our speaker before, Professor Bach, talked about the organizational change. Here we probably talk more at any kind of change that is the result of human activity. And of course, the change can be positive, could be negative, could be primary or secondary, more important, less important, direct, indirect, intended, unintended, and so on and so forth. And we have several impacts of entrepreneurship. And I would say mostly we talk about entrepreneurship in a very positive way. You know, it drives growth, it empowers minority, and so on and so forth. And here is an example of the sustainable impacts, because many companies out there are created that are not sustainable, right? And sustainability is a buzzword in the last 20 years. But in the past, we actually had many businesses that were quite sustainable by nature. And this is the case of an Italian company. It's called Gruppo Saviola. And what they do, well, they were a company producing furnitures. So basically wood for furniture. And then there was World War II. Italy was completely destroyed. The company was starting to rebuild. It's a family business. They were in an area next to a forest because, of course, in the past, how do you actually build furniture? You cut tree and then you make the wood. And this person, Mauro Saviola, he's the founder back then, he started seeing that there was destruction everywhere. Buildings were destroyed, so there was a lot of wood that was basically being burned. The only use that were doing for this wood was basically fuel. And he thought, well, actually, we can do something with this. We could actually, instead of cutting the trees, we could reuse scrap wood in order to produce furniture. And he is one of the first, together with Swedish entrepreneurs who patented the production process, to start recycling woods in the 1950s. And nowadays is a market leader in the world to actually creating these sort of things that we use to produce furniture today, and basically making the waste, as up there, has a fantastic set of furnitures, which are quite even luxurious, okay? And this was done for economic reasons, not out of a good heart. He realized that the trees around this area, they wouldn't be enough to sustain the growth of the business, to sustain the economic boom that Italy was having after the war, the reconstructions. He saw a lot of material that he saw an economic opportunity, and he built a sustainable company. Nowadays, is actually going and teaching sustainability. But when we look at sustainability from in entrepreneurship from an academic point of view, we do, I would say, a little bit of a poor job. So, for example, we have been talking about a lot of these impacts and the impact-oriented forms and practice of entrepreneurship, but we did that in a very scattered way. So we kind of developed subfields. So we have fields like sustainable entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, or environmental entrepreneurship and ecopreneurship. It's all buzzwords, but if you look at the literature, actually those literature don't speak with each other. If you try to publish a paper talking about social entrepreneurship and then you bring in environmental and sustainable, the reviewers will be against you. They will say, well, you're not actually talking about social entrepreneurship. So I think with my co-authors and with colleagues that somehow we're missing a point. We are scattering the efforts in different directions, and we're not actually leveraging what we find in these different fields. So our interest was, well, how has the entrepreneurship field, so the mainstream field, actually progressed so far in examining the impacts of entrepreneurial actions on society and the environment? So not necessarily the impacts instead of creating a social enterprise, but actually the social impact of a standard enterprise, of creating a standard venture. And we did that in this new paper. So it was a couple of years of work with some of my co-authors from Denmark and from Trento. And we basically did an analysis of the literature. So my main methodological expertise is bibliometric and systematic literature reviews. So we went and looked at all the literature that somehow mentioned the impact of entrepreneurship. And we saw that, of course, there has been exponential growth, I would say, as in any field of science nowadays. But something more interesting is to see where these topics were published. And it's interesting to see that it's not really a niche topic. There are actually important contributions from the top journals in business and management, such as Journal of Business Venturing or Journal of Business Ethics, that are there, and the increase is growing. So it is a topic that actually should be studied, but it's not that many. As you can see, we're talking about 8 to 10 papers per in total in a year. We have a look at some foundations. Now, for the sake of time, I will not go too much into detail. And this is part, as I was telling you, of a journey, let's say, that I've been having on looking at the dynamics of sustainable decisions or sustainable economics activities. And I've done this in a number of studies that looked at different aspects of this sustainable impact. And for example, one study from a few years back, which was somehow the trigger and motivation of this whole interest, was a study looking at how management literature look at the Sustainable Development Goals. So actually, what did we do as management scholars to support the research around Sustainable Development Goals? And funnily enough, as you can see, that is basically a keyword map of the terms that were found in the literature, and the bubbles, basically, the bigger the bubbles, the more research is there. There is entrepreneurship there, which is quite central in the network, meaning that it's interconnected very well in the literature, but it's quite small, smaller than I would expect it. And that's why I went into, I thought there would be a gap, and indeed probably there is back then. And then a number of studies with some friends, we started looking from an entrepreneurial ecosystem perspective. So how do we foster these impacts from an ecosystem perspective? So from a policy-making approach in which we should create the conditions for entrepreneurs to somehow replicate what Saviola did by itself. And we created this tool that looked at how we can configure ecosystem and how they evolve, what are the main aspects of sustainability, and what could be the strategic perspective that could empower these actions on environmental, social, and governance, the ESG that we all use. Then we also looked at this aspect inside the company. So we wanted to somehow develop some tools for entrepreneurs to use as well. So we reconfigured, I would say, if we talk about dynamic capabilities, the business model canvas for circular economy and for creating sustainable business model. And in this work, what we did is that we looked at the fintech market. So I was told by a colleague coming here that Kosovo is the country in the world with the highest internet penetration, which is fantastic, honestly. I mean, I come from Italy where we still have to pay cash almost everything. And if you want to pay by card, the coffee, they look at you in a weird way, and you cannot book online a restaurant often. So here we looked at fintech. So we look at how the supportive environment, they can support sustainable business model. And in our case, our case was that a fintech ecosystem can actually be a driver of change and a driver of sustainable business model creation. If we look back a little bit at the literature of the paper that I was mentioning, you can see some of these topics scattered. So we found 4 main areas of interest: entrepreneurship for sustainable development, of course, social entrepreneurship and societal impact, of course, female entrepreneurship for institutional change, and entrepreneurship for inclusive and regional development. And I would like to focus mostly on the inclusive part. So as a, would say, conclusion of that study, we basically understood that, as you can see, there has been quite a lot of study in the social impact of entrepreneurship, but not so much, I would say, in conjunction with environmental and economic impact. So this is interesting to me, because even if the economic impact should be the main driver of studying entrepreneurship, it's not really well studied in conjunction with the social impact. So we also found some open questions, from some open research question to look at these topics, and you can see some here for the younger researchers. If you don't know actually what you want to study, you can simply pick a question from our paper, cite the paper, and then do your research. And up there I put what's next. Well, what's next? As I told you, I have been studying decision making for a long time. So there is part of the unaddressed questions from the impact and the sustainable impact on entrepreneurship. It's somehow the other side, the dark side. So I hopefully try to give some answer to this unattended question in some of my previous work. And one of the topics that I think is really important and is still understudied is that of mental health, burnout, and stress of entrepreneurs. So in this research that I've showed you, most of the societal impacts are on the organization of society, on the empowerment, but very little, really very little, is actually studied on the mindset and the, let's say, the dark side, so the negative impacts of entrepreneurship, entrepreneurial action on the entrepreneurs themselves. So a lot is done on small business, on practices for employees, for example. We have even regulations. I don't know if Kosovo has one, but for example, many European companies, they have a stress and burnout law and regulation that forces companies to have a plan for the mental health of employees. Well, these plans do not apply to entrepreneurs. They do not apply to the managers or the owners of the companies, but only to the employees. And interestingly enough, after the pandemic, we also have been having quite a buzz and a drive into the news as well. If before we were looking at the entrepreneur as the alpha male, mostly, white male, dominant, let's say, the superhero that can carry on, the Elon Musk type of entrepreneur. I always tell my students that, you don't want to end up like Elon Musk, sleeping in your office with all the money you have. Hopefully you have better things to do in your life and more meaningful things to do in your life. But, portraying that image in the society somehow has also detrimental impact, because entrepreneurs actually do not feel empowered to discuss these issues. But this is changing. As you can see there, we have some news from major outlets. And actually, this makes sense because the entrepreneurial activity is actually inherently vulnerable. So it makes the entrepreneurs quite vulnerable. They are closely related to the business performance. Their financial security is related to the organizational performance of their business. Their identity is placed often in the business or in the activity of the business. So a business failure for an entrepreneur is actually a personal failure often, which is not the case in case of managers, in employees, politicians, in other high-level responsibility jobs. And yet we are not looking at this too much. So as I was mentioning to you, I'm a literature researcher, so I went back to the literature, and here I give you some strings for your next literature review paper. And it's quite interesting to see that when we look at the potential dark sides of entrepreneurship, there isn't much research there, but the research that is out there is quite of high quality. So here I'm looking at, for example, cognitive biases. So our cognition that somehow tricks us into making decisions or taking actions that are not actually good for us or for the society. And you can see there are very few results, but there are top journals looking at these results. If we move to other potential dark sides like the personality traits, we have a little bit more research on that. And on stress and mental health, as you can see, there is a lot. But most of this research is actually from the medical sciences. So in management, we are not having the conversation much yet. So it is starting, I would say. There was a symposium at the Academy of Management in the United States this summer about it. So there are things that are moving. And as I was saying, these are mostly questions. I have been trying to give also some answers. So in some recent studies, we looked at nascent entrepreneurs, so the one that we teach, and they are in the first couple of years. So I know many of you teach also entrepreneurial programs. We have a lot of funding on these programs. Yet again, I don't think we are careful enough to explain the dark sides of taking that career. Okay, and here we look at the negative sides of commitment. So anybody that teaches an entrepreneurship class would actually agree that you need to be highly committed to be an entrepreneur in order to see the venture actually coming out. Well, we look at the negative side. So we actually found out that some form of commitment, specifically affective and instrumental commitment, they are actually relating and leading to overinvestment. Overinvestment, both in the sense of tangible resources. So you throw good money at bad money, which makes sense. I mean, this has been studied, but also overinvestment in terms of emotional and personal resources. So the more committed these entrepreneurs are, these nascent entrepreneurs, which are 22, 23 are, the more actually they get invested, which then as a result, whenever they will fail, and they will fail because most of the activities fail and they should actually fail, then they leave it. So because they are too committed, potentially it's our fault how we teach, but maybe not, I don't know. But here we saw we developed some profiles of those that are more prone to be too highly committed. We also wanted to find a solution, and we are managing a project for the European Union in Trenton with my colleague Bob Bastian. We did the first step, which was developing this theoretical framework in which we basically argued that we should include also academics and researchers in the process of the business model design. So entrepreneurs, in order to have sustainable businesses, our argument is to include scientists and researchers and academics into the cognitive process, into the process of designing the business model, because that would somehow debunk some of the biases that we have seen and most probably lead to more sustainable actions. So what's next? In conclusion, well, we need somehow to expand the research on the correlation between the three types of impact, so the societal, the environmental, and the economic impact. We also need to consider the role of technology and how technology actually changes this impact, or either empower or actually brings us negative impact. And finally, and most dearly to me, we need to look at the cognitive and behavioral components of entrepreneurship and impact. So understanding how we can nudge, I would say, entrepreneurs to develop businesses that have a positive impact, and at the same time, how we can protect entrepreneurs from the dark sides of being an entrepreneur, especially of being an entrepreneur in a hyper-competitive environment, hyper-changing environment where technology really changes on the daily basis, and that triggers even further insecurities on the mental health of the entrepreneurs that instead we need solid and steering the economy. That is all. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I will be happy to discuss this further with anyone during the conference.
Thank you, Professor Caputo. Tani është tema lidhur me ndërmarrësit, migrant, si zhvillues shumëfisht, gjurmimi potencialit dhe pengesat në ndërmarrësi. Është profesoresha Karolin Lautlof Granditz, është antropologe sociale dhe një ulëmtuese lartë e qendrës ndërdisiplinore Viadrina Borders in Motion në Universitetin Evropian Viadrina. Ajo mori doktoratën e saj nga Universiteti Martin Luther në Halle dhe habilitimin Venia Legendi në antropologji sociale nga Universiteti i Vienës. Kryen kërkime për migracionin, kufit, sigurinë sociale, kujdesin dhe familjen, duke fokusuar veçanërisht në vendet e Jugosllavisë dhe Gjermanin përfshirë rajonin e Shkufirit brenda Gjermanë. Përveç monografisë së saj, kujdesi translokal për te kufive të Kosovës, i rikonfigurimi i familjes për gjatë linjave gjinore dhe breznive, ajo ka botuar punimet rreth pretendimit të pronësisë në Kroaci, pas luftës, dinamika marrëdhënieve pronësore dhe konfliktit etnik në rajonin e Kninit, lit 2007, dhe së fundmi ka redaktuar seksionin special Ballkani si hapësirë dyfisht, tranziti, demarkimi kufive dhe shkeljet e kufive midis banorëve lokal dhe migrantëve tranzit në jenë e regjimit kufirit të Bashkimit Evropian. Aktualisht Karolin punon në një projekt financuar nga Leibniz mbi sipërmarrësit migrant dhe lidhjen midis migracionit dhe zhvillimit në Kosovë. Please, Professor Karolin.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. for the invitation. I think it's a great opportunity to be here, and it's a great honor to speak in the Academy of Sciences. Thank you so much for the invitation. As you said, I'm a social anthropologist, so I come from a different perspective, and I think this is really fruitful. Besnik and I did a summer university course together on migrant entrepreneurs, and my previous, long time ago project, but still relatively recently published a study on translocal migrant family relations, so between Germany, Austria and Kosovo rural area was in fact the starting point of the project, because I thought, okay, migrants invest in a lot, but not necessarily in businesses. So I thought my next project will be to focus on the businesses. And especially, and I think here it links up very well to what we heard previously about what is the contribution to development. So what I want to do here is now to trace the potential and obstacles of migrant entrepreneurship in kind of bringing forward development in Kosovo. Is it here? No. How do I use that? It shouldn't work, but somehow it doesn't work. Do I have to turn it on? Yes. Okay. Yes. Okay, thank you. So I want to start with, kind of setting the scene. What you see here are the Western Balkan countries, and yes, they are not yet in the European Union. And you see the European Union countries. And most of the Western Balkan countries have been part of socialist Yugoslavia, and there was labor migration from the 1960s on. And in all these now new states, long ago states partly, from successor states of former Yugoslavia, there was labor migration from the 1960s, and we have it all until now. So there's a lot of out-migration in different waves, but in fact, in Kosovo from the 2015-16 on, with the Western Balkan Agreement with Germany, you have a new wave of out-migration. And it reached, in fact, a critical point that in some areas like construction, but medical care, especially doctors, medicine professions, it's really pressing. So there is a need to kind of turn the tide and to create conditions that people like to stay. And so from international actors, but also, of course, state actors, there's the idea that migrants can do it. They can do it from afar or by returning. And so there's a lot of hope that as soon as they invest in the right sources, and especially as soon as they build up businesses here, that would be the key of turning the tide. So migrant entrepreneurs, yes, they are very visible in Kosovo. I mean, when you arrive at the airport, you see their advertisements. For example, Duacom, it's a dating app for Albanians created by a Albanian from Switzerland who returned here. And you see it all in the airport. It's tackling the diaspora community or generally the Albanian community. You have the Hazroli brothers who produce doors and windows and so on for the Kosovo market, but also for the international market. And you have Speaks, it's a call center and generally business outsourcing center with now I think 1,500 employees. Also, I mean, mainly tackling the international market. So yes, they are visible, but what exactly do they contribute? So my research question, so what I started here is, so in which way do they themselves see as in development actors and what kind of ideas about development do they convey? What are the assets, potentials, and obstacles of this migrant entrepreneurship? And I mean, I'm from a border center. What is the border asymmetry logic in it? So how do these asymmetries contribute or can also be diminished? I will speak about it a little bit more. And then yes, national and international dimensions, so this different ways of embeddedness. And then I finally come back to the question, are they multi-developers? Are they the super entrepreneurs who then turn the tide here? So the structure of my paper is that I will clarify a little bit more the terms and the analytical frames, especially also in relation to border asymmetries, and I will give some empirical facts about border asymmetries. I explain the methods, then the sample of my enterprises I looked at, and then I go into the empirical findings, and then I come up with a conclusion. So, I mean, before going into development, just maybe about migrant entrepreneurs, because at least from a German perspective, it might be misleading because people ask me, but there are not so many migrants in Kosovo. No, I mean this diaspora entrepreneurs, Kosovo Albanians who either return, but who might also not return, but have mobile lives, but build up an enterprise here. They might be first generation, meaning that they moved as adults and returned or remains this kind of transnational life, but these are also second generation, those either, I mean, have been schooled abroad or have been born abroad and then decided to build up their enterprise. Yes, and for development, I mean, here I link up to what Andrea has said earlier. We can have a narrow definition focusing mainly on economy, and I think economists often do that, in fact, but you can also have a wider definition and so say, okay, it is the improvement of living conditions for all members of society. And so we need to take into account the complex interactions between economies, social, culture, political, and ecological factors. And I think it's a more fruitful approach because, we need to build up more than kind of material means. When we look at development theories, and development is also a critical word, there are theories which say, okay, it's endemic. Some societies might develop more slowly than others. There are these kind of world system or dependency theories which say, no, it is in fact the richer countries which kind of create the underdevelopment in those which they kind of embed in their structures, like taking migrants from, I mean, in the Kosovo case, lots of migrants migrate to Germany and so on, and it's better for the German society than maybe for the Kosovo society. And there are post-colonial theories which generally criticize the notion, I mean, the values, what is exactly at stake when we speak about development. So this would link up about, so should we look at economy or should we look at other factors when we discuss development? So the border perspective I want to bring in is that when you look at Kosovo and Germany, for example, as two different national cultures. These are so the border also is the border between systems. But then we also know that the market is interlinking the system. So we have a lot of interlinkages. So borders can be, define asymmetric systems, but they link them at the same time. So they can either foster asymmetries, or they can level out those asymmetries, or they might also be a game changer, so that new things can happen. And so for me, migrant entrepreneurs might be this kind of bridge building figures who can either use or challenge this kind of asymmetries in order to make influence on development, and they can create spillover effects on other realms with their enterprises. So when we look at border asymmetries in Kosovo compared to migrant destinations, we have many. Just to kind of flesh out some, we have a young population here compared to Western European countries. We have low cost for labor, especially low social security costs. It is import oriented. It is a very small market. You have high cross-border mobility restrictions, now less, fortunately, but still I think it matters. And especially it's also regarded with low trust from Western European countries, but often even from within, so for business relations, and there is often a lack of necessary resources, infrastructures, and so on. So my study, as said in the introduction, is funded by the Leibniz Research Foundation, and I have partners. So we are 3 institutions. It's Ulf Brumbauer from the Leibniz Institute in Regensburg. It's a historian. Then we have a sociologist from the Leibniz Institute for Agricultural Economies in Transition Countries in Halle. And so my approach was that, you can have 2 perspectives, a state-centered, looking at state institutions and what they want to achieve, but you can also take a migrant-centered approach, this entrepreneurial approach, and see what they say. Of course, it's often very difficult then to prove exactly if what they say is also grounded by facts, but I take statistics in order to ground that, and also other reports of think tanks. Here you have Reinvest publishing really a lot of great reports. So it is possible to ground the interview material in it. So I have even more than 25 enterprises here. And as a social anthropologist, I do not just do one interview, but I follow them up. Ideally, we create friendships, and I follow them up over a long time, and we have various conversations. And then, of course, I also did expert interviews with state, non-state, and international organizations. And then I missed it, unfortunately, but you have also events yesterday. I don't know if some of you have been there. The Kosovo-German Economic Forum with, I think, at least 600 registered participants. I think some of those participants definitely are migrant entrepreneurs. So I did not look for a special branch. I wanted to, in a snowball sample, see what is out there. And yes, it's very different. You have the new economies like IT services, fintech, call centers, but you have also industry production like furniture, construction, installation, trade, different market orientation, national, international, and also a diaspora market like in a combination. And you have 5 to 1,500 employees altogether. So what are the assets migrant entrepreneurs have in order to invest at home? Just yes. yes, there are a lot of, so to say, also the social and cultural remittances. So the skills they received abroad, especially when they did university training, second generation. These are, in fact, mostly those who opened the call centers or who established fintechs here. Or other applications. They use their international connections and trusted networks, especially when they tackle the international market, because of there is this lack of trust. So it's very important to have this kind of bridging out this mistrust. They use their Germanness, Swissness, EU as a sign of quality for the Kosovo market, in fact, because, I mean, advertising this kind of German quality is not just for the German market, but also for the Kosovo market. And they, at that time, also cover a special role as pioneers in national and international markets, because also Kosovo is very small, so it's under the radar very often of international, so they are the first to come and others then might follow. The motivation, definitely profit-making, but lots of them also said, or nearly all, that they wanted also to promote development in their countries for Kosovo, but also for themselves. So, I mean, asking about mindset, it was also giving them a meaning in life, not just kind of earning money, but because they said, okay, money I could have made somewhere else more easy. So here, but I take the effort because I contribute to society, and this is also contribution to myself. When it comes to constraints, although, yes, I mean, especially first generation, they have knowledge here, but second generation is already more difficult. They speak the language, but they don't know about procedures here and so on. So they lack local knowledge, and then it's very important to connect to local actors. And I think this networking, and I think it's absolutely underestimated, that we always look at migrant entrepreneurs as a development agent, but I mean, there are lots of local people behind who keep the business running or make it successful. In fact, so it's very important to look at that. So they meet infrastructure barriers, administrative barriers. I will maybe speak about that later a bit. And often also very important difficulties to find appropriate employees. And this is, at least from a German perspective, first of all, a surprise, because at least when I started doing my previous research, there was this incredible number of unemployed people here, and then this incredible high number of university-educated people. So you would think that they're all here out just waiting for a job, but no, most entrepreneurs in all kinds of sectors told me there's a lack of workforce, and especially lack of trained workforce. And then there are, of course, also barriers to fulfill EU standards. But here again, it is a power relation. I mean, who sets the standard, and how to achieve that when you do business from here. And as I said, there's mistrust abroad. So the fields of development then, when you look at all these other things, it's really a wide field of development assets. It is, or ideas, it's catching up very often from this idea. You come from a more developed society as an entrepreneur and helping Kosovo to catch up what has been already achieved elsewhere. And then it's also a lot about changing work culture, that has been said often, and I will in part go in part of these fields in more detail when I look at quotes. It's co-development in infrastructure, banking system, legal system. It is creating better employment possibilities, training the workforce, promotion of young talents, offering better social security standards, changing the narrative about Kosovo, and creating innovative solutions for Kosovo and the international market, and in that way changing, so to say, the story. So I just to go a little bit into empirical material. This, I think, what migrant entrepreneurs said it's extremely important to do the image reframing, kind of sell, so to say, Kosovo as a land of opportunity, especially for international investors or international partners, because for an international, for a company working with German companies and so on, German companies need to trust. So in Kosovo, and this is what especially those people who came build up their businesses directly after the war, but even now it is still something. One said, for example, Kosovo as a place of innovation is something that other people have to believe. We have to keep this in mind and very much use this way of thinking as saying, look, we've got to see Kosovo as an innovative place, as a launchpad for innovation. So, this is, so instead of saying, oh, we are still lagging behind, it is kind of turning the story and saying, no, it's the other way around. Then there's a lot of co-development in areas such as infrastructure, as I said. And here I refer to someone in fintech, and fintech, one can imagine, is wireless, and it needs a lot of legal regulations, security regulations, and so on. So he said, okay, that's what you're officially saying is let's get a Formula One or a McLaren or something like that, and let's bring that to Kosovo. And when you get here, you realize, oh, the roads are not here to drive the McLaren. So we said, okay, we are bringing the supercar, and then we are like, right, we got to get into the business of building the roads, and then we start driving the car. And that's a lot we have done. We've done a lot in infrastructure work to get that done. So there's co-development in fields which you would not necessarily directly attach to the enterprise. It may be banking system and so on. It has a lot of spillover effects. But then, of course, there are also barriers in it. I will maybe speak about that a bit later. But just to follow up on other fields like professional training for employees, as I said, most firms said, yes, we have not enough workforce and especially not enough trained workforce. And so there's a lot of investment in educating the workforce. And if it's a car mechanic or if it's someone in a call center or in the fintech, what they have is a kind of schools in order to educate their workforce, doing internship and then taking the best in order to create their pool of employers. There's a lot of transfer in values. So here I have a quote. We want to pass on this Swiss work mentality and the Swiss workers which we want to bring with us to Kosovo and also live them. Yeah, and then he said, okay, when we just have new employees here, we went to the balcony and said, okay, there is Kosovo out there, and here inside is Switzerland. So it is the kind of marking also, again, border asymmetries. So stressing border asymmetries, stressing cultural asymmetries, and in order to stress on this transfer of values. Very important is also that especially call centers, fintech, all these IT sectors are seen as good employers in the way that you have a good salary, and you have a good salary in the way that it might even outnumber the salary of a professor here, so that you might earn up to 2,000 euro a month, which is, here is a average salary is 500, so it's really, it says a lot. And also argument that our positions are stable, so you can take a loan, you can buy an apartment, you have a future with a job, and you might even have a career. I spoke to employees, they see it partly a bit different, I have to say, but this is, so the story told by migrant entrepreneurs. Also very important is a social security provider. As I said, in Kosovo, labor costs as social security costs are very minimal. And in fact, this is also reason why, or one of the reasons why people leave to Western Europe, because they say, okay, but here I have unemployment benefits, good health care and so on. And they don't have it. So firms partly said that, yes, I mean, here definitely they have health insurance, but then employees didn't always want to have the health insurance because they have to contribute to it themselves. So it's also an educational perspective in that. Or maternity leave, and is it also granted for the male parent or as the father or just for the mother, for example. Changing the story, instead of just saying that, my project has German quality, there are also, like Speaks, for example, said, no, we say it is made in Kosovo. So we are not hiding behind German quality, so to say, but we are standing here in order to say, no, our product, so we are proud of this being produced in Kosovo. I find it very interesting that you have a lot of alcoholic drinks in the international market as a Muslim country. Maybe this is also, I mean, at least majority are identify as Muslim, put it that way. As you have, for example, this Vidasos distillery having very nice gin, and Stone Castle producing very high quality wines and exporting that internationally. So you have it in different fields, in fact, where the story is changed, and these are all migrant entrepreneurs, in fact, who bring that in. So when I come to the one of those conclusions, I want to go a little bit beyond that later, but what about utilization, leveling, and framing of these border asymmetries? Yes, of course. First of all, migrant entrepreneurs use these border asymmetries. They utilize lower wage costs. So this is often their selling point. There's a way of making revenue that it's cheaper to produce here than in Germany. But at the same time, they invest in innovative and better infrastructure. And with that, they are also leveling out creating connections and creating new ecosystems. They create attractive jobs, at least partly. I don't want to say they all do, definitely, because then it's also this kind of tension with utilizing lower wage costs. So it's always, it has to be taken carefully what is said and what is really done, I would have to say. But as ideally with that, they counteract brain drain. And for example, Speaks, for example, they also say that now even young diaspora members come back in order to work for our company. So it is not just that migrants come here to build enterprises, but other migrants follow to return to work in these enterprises. So training workforce, discover and promoting talents, transfer of EU values. This is, of course, also a little bit, I would say, critical, because it's a power hierarchy. It is clearly that those values are given by the West, so to say, the European Union, and one can at least question if one should always follow these values. Many of them try to reframe Kosovo as hub for quality and innovation. So what we have seen, there is multidimensional development, but there are also risks. First of all, we know entrepreneurs fail. Also there is failure. And I do not have quantitative numbers, but it would be very interesting to know if they fail more than domestic entrepreneurs or not. And And they partly compete with local firms. We always have to think that the one who comes here might crowd out others. So he might or she might create working positions, but maybe the other one then has to close his doors or her doors. So then it can also be that others may follow, so internationals may follow. That might be good, but then on the other hand, it is always also about power dynamics. Who is directing, so to say, the economic process. Definitely they face and create new set of constraints underlying Western values and practices. Maybe just to tell as a conclusion for the needs, I think what really became clear when speaking to migrant entrepreneurs, I found it very astonishing because the state and international actors are very active in saying, we want to promote migrant entrepreneurship, we want to promote entrepreneurship. There are programs and so on, there are conferences, but most of the entrepreneurs I spoke said, oh no, keep distance and let us just doing our job. But then on the other hand, they also said, yes, we want to have support, non-monetary support, but in the realm of education that migrant entrepreneurs do not have to educate their own workforce, which especially now, when there's a lot of competition, you train them, but then they go to the competitor, especially in call centers. Is it now the case? I think it's still good for the employees because then they can bargain their salaries better. So it has definitely positive sides, also for development of higher quality employment. But also in the realm of social security, as they say, okay, we have good employees, but then sooner or later they will go to Germany because we can create a nice working place, but we cannot change society. So at least not the way they would want it. So the state definitely has to come in here, and they definitely have to come in, I would argue, in more social security for citizens. But then, of course, it's also the question of who pays the state, and this is tax. And when the tax is very low, it is very difficult for the state to have enough money in order to pay social security. So in that way, I think it's really a way of a much more complex story than it looks like. Yes, of course, infrastructure, material legal administration. Administration is working not so well yet. It is improving, but then definitely there are boundaries also in the legal sphere, and here the state has to come in, certainly. Okay, so what is needed is a better connection between migrant entrepreneurs and state institutions in order to foster transfer and exchange as well as common ideas. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much to our keynote speakers for sharing their latest research and insights on diverse range of topics on entrepreneurship and management. I want to draw your attention on today's agenda. We will have two parallel sessions. The first one, which will be held in this room, and the second is downstairs, written in the agenda as -1 room. Also, I'm looking very much forward to our Meet the Editor session. So especially, I would like to invite early career researchers and PhD students to attend a great group of scholars, including Andrea Caputo, who is editor-in-chief in Strategic Management Journal, Journal of Enterprising Communities, and many others. And then Andrea Kalmuser, International Journal of Entrepreneurial Behavior and Research, Dominic Komba, European Innovation Management Journal, and also Velian Ramadani. So thank you very much. We can go now in the coffee break and continue our work. Thank you again.